And once again, a very warm welcome to all of our attendees this morning. We'd like to just remind you again about the tips to continually prevent COVID-19. You see it everywhere, you hear it everywhere, and I'm sure you're tired of hearing about it, but obviously we do want to do our part to prevent it from spreading. Not only that, we also want to try and see if we cannot get back to the normal way of living like we used to before. And the only way to do that is to get rid of COVID-19 within ourselves, our own homes, our own companies, and hopefully we can stop the spread that way. So please continue to wash your hands regularly, use alcohol hand sanitizers if you don't have access to clean running water and soap. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth with unwashed hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze with a flexed elbow or tissue, and then throw that tissue into the bin. Clean and disinfect. Frequently touch objects and surfaces, and then do your part and get vaccinated. Now, this morning we are discussing what types of safety file you need, and this is because many of you plumbers out there were requesting information on the types of safety file your clients are requiring from you, or even when you get audited by the Department of Labor. So we are going to discuss the different types of safety files, what goes into the safety file, and also perhaps if you have any questions at the end, we will leave some extra time for questions. So we are going to just briefly discuss the types of safety files, say for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we will leave extra time at the end of this toolbox talk if you have questions about these safety files. So what type of safety file do you actually need? Well, let's first understand what is a safety file. A safety file is a set of documents that is specific to the scope of work you are performing. Now, as a plumber, there's many different types of plumbing installations that you can do. In fact, it's not just the installation of plumbing, it's the maintenance of plumbing. It could also include some sort of building work. Perhaps you need to chop out or demolish a wall in order to get to the plumbing or in order to install the plumbing. Another type of work or scope of work would be excavation or trenching. See, you performing plumbing and installing a waste pipe on a level ground is different to installing it underground or perhaps on height under a ceiling. All of these areas basically have the same type of work, but it's in a different area. And that is why we have the need for understanding what type of safety file you need specifically. So these documents that are specific to your scope of work that you are performing will also be applied in different ways. But the safety file itself should always follow a logical outline, and this is what we call an index. The index will then help us to understand what is in the safety file, and it must always be consistent. In other words, if you are on site and you have an OHS plan, this is the health and safety plan of how you are going to perform all your tasks on a specific construction site, then your risk assessment or even your safe work method statement, your safe work procedures should all speak the same language. Let's say, for instance, inside your health and safety plan, you are stating that you're going to install a hydroboil at heights. Well, then the risk assessment should include not just the installation of a hydroboil, it should also include the methodology of how you are going to go about doing that. And this would include the risks on the tools, the task, as well as the environment that you are in. That would be working at heights, on a ladder, scaffold, roof, inside ceiling, etc. So you can see that it's not just about the installation, the maintenance, or the actual plumbing or scope of work. It's also about where this work is going to be performed and how the work is going to be performed. So this is very, very important to understand. So there are three parts to a safety file. First of all, you're going to have legal documentation. Legal documentation tells us what are the minimum requirements in terms of the law, obviously the OSH Act, the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Disease Act, as well as the various different regulations. These copies of the law will include other documentation that is needed in a file, such as your WCL forms. If you're with FEM, you'll need an FEM form. All of these forms are legal document that is normally given to you from the government. This is what makes up our legal register. A legal register basically says that for the scope of work you are performing, these are the specific regulations that apply to you. Let me give you an example. For myself as a company, I have a company health and safety file that tells you what happens in my company, inside our offices, how to work with screens, how to set up your chairs and tables, how to ensure that you use the steps correctly. These are all specific just to the area I'm working in or where my employees are working in. But should I need to go out to site, my client may request me to give them some sort of method plan or methodology. Now, this method statement of how I'm going to perform work on their site. Now, it's not a whole safety file because I'm not performing construction work, so I might just be going out to do an audit for them. And so I give them a piece of document that applies directly to their area, their working environment. In other words, it's more site specific. But I need to take a look at what regulation affects me on their site. For instance, I often go into restaurants, into the actual kitchens, or sometimes into the refrigerators. Now, because I'm performing auditing, the scope of work that will affect me is the auditing around what I'm doing for the client. But the area that I'm putting myself into has got an additional regulation where the minimum safety requirements are necessary. When I get into the kitchen, I have to wear a hairnet. And so I need to look at HACCP requirements. So those regulations will now affect me inside their scope, their area, sorry. It doesn't affect my scope of work. You see, I'm still performing auditing. So let's apply that to you as a plumber. Let's say as a plumber, you needed to go into a kitchen to change a tap. Now, your health and safety plan states that you should have your overalls on or your uniform, safety boots, perhaps gloves or goggles. It doesn't mention anything about a hairnet. But when you get to your client chases you offsite because you don't have a hairnet inside the kitchen. Well, that is because the area that you are putting yourself into has other regulations in place that outline the minimum requirements. So this starts helping us to understand that inside our safety file, we start with our baseline, that is everything that the company does. Then we take a look at the legal documentation that applies to our company. But as soon as we go to any other area, any other client, or perform any other task, we need to identify the piece of legislation, the copy of the law, the regulation that applies to us or applies to the site. And then we need to ensure that that is incorporated into our safety file. And we'll explain to you exactly how that works in a minute. Then other documentation, obviously your WCL forms, and this is because of your general administrative regulations. Your general administrative regulation states that there's certain documentation that must be kept either by yourself as a company, which is your Annexure 1 for recording of an incident on site. But as soon as you need to report an incident on site, then this is what we call a Section 24. Section 24 of the OSHAC states that if there's anything that happens on a site that injures a person, or whether they become ill or get sick on site, you need to notify the Department of Labor. Now, this is a WCL1 or a WCL2 form or an FEM form, depending on which DOL or FEM you are with. But once you've got this document, you need to complete it and hand it in either to the doctor and then go online to your eCoid or FEM and actually submit a digital copy of this document. This applies to every single company. So it's an occupational illness or an occupational injury, not a specific scope of work. So if you're a plumber, if you're an electrician, if you're a builder, if you're a handyman, it does not necessarily mean the scope of work you're performing. These legal documents will apply to every single person. But if you are not in the construction industry, perhaps you just provide services such as coffees, perhaps you own a little restaurant, then the construction regulation doesn't affect you. But the OSHAC will still affect you. Your general safety regulations, your general administrative regulations will still affect you. But as a plumber, you might go into a construction site. Then the piece of legislation that you will need is the construction regulations, and you need to abide by and follow all of those regulations. Now, please also remember that legal documents are always the minimum requirements. So if it is set out in any one of these pieces of legislation, it's the minimum requirement for you and your company to perform, which means we can always do better. So if it tells us to do one thing, you can improve on that health and safety. It shouldn't be too much for us to implement a safety plan because it is always the minimum requirements. And so what we want to strive for is best practice. Look at what others are doing, what's happening in the industry, and see if you cannot improve on this type of legislation. The second part to your safety file is your compliance documents. This is your personal company's methodology. These will be things like how you're going to perform it in a health and safety plan, planning for the entire work, a policy on what stand your company takes in terms of health and safety, environment, smoking, drugs, HIV/AIDS, any type of area that you as a company want to make a difference to. Your main policy is always a health and safety policy in terms of Section 7 of the OSH Act. But as a company, you might want to do more, perhaps for the environment, and have an environmental policy. But what if you are working with a lot of waste? Then you need to perhaps have a waste management policy, because as a company, you might either be generating waste, and you will then need to show effectively that you are controlling that type of waste or byproduct of something that you are manufacturing. And so these legal compliance documents are specific to you as a company. So your company, you will have specific documents outlining your stand on health and safety. Then we have live working documents. These documents are things like registers and checklists. They are daily, weekly, monthly, every 6 months, every year. These types of documents are constantly completed in order to perform what we call monitoring and review of the actual safety file. You see, if we have a tool, let's say, for instance, a drill or a grinder, and as a company, your health and safety plan states that you will issue all tools in a safe manner. You will also ensure that it is used safely, and then you will ensure that it is packed away safely. How do you prove that that is being done? Well, the live working documents, your register, your checklist, your DSTI, plan task observation, all of these are types of live working documents that prove what you are saying in your compliance documents is actually being done in the site for that specific scope of work. So all safety files must be company specific for your own company, scope specific, or perhaps even site specific. So let's take a look at the 3 different types of files you probably will have. The first one, and this is a file that every single company must have. It is a company specific safety file. This is the type of safety management system that is designed to keep the actual company, the environment around you, your employees, your customers, and any other person safe from the scope of work that you are performing. Now, let's say, for instance, you are not actually doing plumbing at your company. You only provide that as a service. Well, then there are other things in the company, the running of the company, that could create a hazard. Let's give you an example. You have a home office. Inside your home office, you use a laptop, you use a phone, you have a printing machine. Perhaps you invite clients around to sit and have a meeting with you, or perhaps you even go out to a coffee shop to have a meeting with them. These are all basic running or outlines of your actual company. It's not the tasks you perform on site, it's the tasks you're actually performing inside your company. Well, you still need to have a policy of how you're going to keep your employees safe. For one, your employees will always have to drive to and from a specific area, especially if you don't have a company where clients come in to receive a service, you go out to a client to perform a service. That is one of the biggest hazards that we have in South Africa. Driving on roads is a leading cause of deaths in South Africa. And so your health and safety policy might be very, very inclusive of that specific hazard or that specific danger that your employees might face. In fact, you will go maybe a step further and include additional information on how you are going to ensure the safety of your employee and other road users. Perhaps even when you arrive on site, how you are going to protect your client's property, or your client's employees from the hazard of using a vehicle. You see, all of those additional services are the running of the actual company, not necessarily just installing plumbing on site. You see, the entire running of the company must also be governed by a health and safety policy, so it is company specific. It might also outline how you are going to protect the environment by the scope of work that you perform. You see, when you perform plumbing, you might need to get rid of certain waste. And if there's waste that you are working in, it might have a biological hazard attached to it. How are you going to get rid of this effectively? Well, you'll have a policy in place. And all of these policies must have some sort of plan, some method. You are stating what you are going to do. You now need to state how you are going to do it. And that is the method, your safe working procedure. Then you need to check that it is being done. Now, again, these are all internal documents. This safety file does not go anywhere. It's not taken to site, it's not given out. These are documents that are in place at your actual company. They are used internally to monitor and ensure legal compliance to the OSH Act and regulations for you personally. In other words, this safety file cannot be used on sites. It only outlines the work that takes place at the company, as well as the services you provide, with a baseline risk assessment. You probably will not have an OHS plan. A health and safety plan is specific to a construction site. So the OSH Act does not ask you to design a health and safety plan. The OSH Act asks you for a policy and then supporting documents of how you are going to monitor your own health and safety. A health and safety plan is requested by a principal contractor and a client to tell you how you are going to plan for the works on site, a specific site, and how you are going to specifically do scopes of works for that site. That is the health and safety plan. Aside from that, you will have policies, method statements, and your own personal registers and checklists. So what does the law say in this regard? Well, the OSH Act states that every employer, this means every single company, it doesn't matter how big your company is, as soon as you have a company, you should have a safety file. It might not be a very big safety file, but you are responsible for protecting yourself, your employees, as well as any other person that may be affected by your work. Now, this does not start on a site. It starts from the day you open your company. And so you must have your own risk-based thinking approach to protecting your employees, yourself and others. And this will include creating your own company health and safety file that is always based on what we call a hierarchy of control. And this is balancing your risks. So you first identify all the hazards that your company exposes yourself or others to. You then try to eliminate that risk if you can. If you cannot eliminate it, you try to reduce it or substitute it with something that is less dangerous. If that is not possible and that risk has to be there, you can either try and isolate the risk so that employees are not directly confronted with it or directly affected by it. And then you can try and put two controlling systems in place. You can either have a management control or a safe system of work. The safe system of work could be things like training, safe method statements, how to actually perform the job safely in some sort of document. And then finally, you will issue PPE to your staff. We will always try to use this hierarchy of control when it comes to any risk that we face in our company. So please remember, this will go for any type of work that you are performing. We then have a scope-specific safety file. A scope-specific safety file is derived from your actual company file. Your company file is your baseline. It will tell us all the tasks you perform for your clients, including the specific tasks that you're performing inside the actual company. The use of your PC, the setting up of your desk, the cleaning and housekeeping of your company, the hygiene routines of your own company, which is not going to be done on site, but is done internally in your own company. But as soon as you provide a service for someone, so you've got a health and safety file for your company, you look after your own internal health and safety or any things that you're doing in there, then you have services that you perform for your client. A call out to do a change of a geyser element. Now that is a scope, that is a specific scope that you are performing, a specific task that you are performing. You now have a separate safety file that outlines all of the different types of tasks, scope-specific tasks that you are performing. And this scope-specific file is taken from your original file, because your original file has all of that as a baseline information. You would then derive all of that in safe work method statements, risk assessments. Yes, it might not be site-specific, because this file is usually kept with a team in their vehicle, and it tells the team themselves what major hazards they may face when performing this specific scope. So working or changing an element inside a geyser, things like electricity, you need to isolate that electricity before you can work on the geyser. They may be exposed to hot elements, they may be exposed to water, the leakage of water, they may be exposed to waterborne diseases, bacteria. If they're working inside a ceiling where this geyser is going to be installed, they might be affected by working at heights. They might be affected by dust inside there, rodents, snakes. There are so many different things that are not necessarily site-specific, but scope-specific, because the changing of a geyser in different areas will affect your employees. And so they need to have a risk assessment, not for your client on site, not for that private house that you are going to. This is to protect your employees who are performing these scope of works. So this is kept inside their van. They then look at the risk assessments. They outline exactly how it's going to affect them. They issue themselves their PPE. They do a register and checklist on their tools, because even though it's not a construction site, you as a company are responsible for ensuring the health and safety of your employees, not only on sites, but as a company. All right, so you need to then cover the scope. Find out what is the task you're performing, and every task will have a method of how you are going to do it. You need to include the safety protocols. You need to tell us what tools you are going to be using, and then how to use them safely, the types of material or equipment you're using, and the method of using it safely. So depending on what is done, there is always a regulation or act that will cover those minimum requirements. So always go back to your legal register and see how to keep your staff safe. The last type of safety file you might use is a site-specific safety file. This is again derived from your company policies and procedures. You then have all of your scope of works that you are performing. Now what you are doing is you are applying it to a specific site. So this compromises all of your tasks that you're doing only for that site. So it's not a general safety file which says these are all the works that my company perform. No, it's what you've quoted your client to do on a specific site, generally on a construction site, or perhaps working for a corporate client like IOPSA Bank or Nedbank, where they request a safety file from you for all of the work you are going to perform on site. Now, in some cases, in fact, in all cases, a client should issue you a site safety specification, a specification of what must be done when entering their site, how you are to enter and exit, what type of information you need to provide them from method statements, safe working procedures. All of that information is derived from the client's safety specifications. If you're in construction, generally this will come from either the client itself or the principal contractor that you are working with or under. Now, these safety files cover all your work with the addition of identifying the impact of the site or how you will affect the site itself. Please remember, a site-specific safety file will take the scope of work you are performing and apply it to a specific site. It cannot be general. which means you need to be on site, checking the hazards and the risks on site, perhaps almost every day. This is why the need for a DSTI, a daily safe task instruction, or daily supervisor task instruction is often issued to you, because your task may not change, but the site always does. And so all of these files almost lead or bleed into each other, but you must have a company-specific safety file. You will always have a scope-specific safety file that is kept with your team inside the bucky. And then in addition, you will always issue a site-specific file to your client when they request one. All of these comprises a safety management system of your entire company. Yeah, great. Thank you very much for that. Just to add on, if you haven't done the compliance officers courses yet, please reach out to us 071-875-2070 or chris@ohss.co.za, or just go to our services page on www.ohss.co.za. Scroll down to the bottom of the page. You'll see the free course there available for you. Don't forget, on a Monday morning at 8 a.m. is the Man in the Van podcast. That is education through a conversation. And then lastly, the tips to continually prevent COVID-19. Please do your part to prevent the spread.